Aloha mai kako, everyone. Aloha. My name is Kalei'okalani, and I'm here on behalf of Seattle Asian American Film Festival. Mahalo nui for joining us on a Q&A with these amazing directors as a part of the Looking Past Paradise short segment as part of the 9th annual SAAFF programming. We have today with us ʻāina Paikai, the filmmaker, Native Hawaiian director of Hawaiian Soul. We also have joining us Jalena Keane-Lee, the director of Standing Above the Clouds and also co-founder of Breaktide Productions, based in the Bay Area. We have with us Ciara Lacy, director, Native Hawaiian filmmaker, and self-identified director, I like that, who brought to our film festival, This is the Way We Rise. And we are also welcoming Erin Lau, Native Hawaiian filmmaker of The Moon and the Night. So mahalo nui loa for everybody joining us today. Really excited to have you. But before we jump into the rest of the program, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge, ke ʻāina o ka poʻe Ko Salish, this land of the Ko Salish people, and whose people have been here since time immemorial, who have practiced aloha ʻāina, the stewardship and the love and care for land. And we, from our ku'upu'uwai, mahalo nui loa, ko kākou pu'uwai, ko kākou a'au, no ko lākou aloha ʻāina, no ko lākou mana pau'ole. We thank them from the bottom of our hearts for their stewardship of the land, for their love of the land, and for their never-ending mana. So please also take a moment to acknowledge the indigenous peoples, the first peoples of the lands where you are currently residing, of the lands where you may be tuning in from today. And I encourage you to learn more about those peoples as well. Mahalo, mahalo no hui ana keia. So I wanted to take a moment to, again, just express my personal, and I'm sure on behalf of everyone who's just watched these films, reaction of how powerful all of these films are in their own unique way. And I'm excited to jump into each one of them. But first, I wanted to ask you folks, what is your initial reaction? Like, what does it mean for you to have your work featured in the Seattle Asian American Film Festival, otherwise known as SAAFF, focusing on Asian American short films and feature-length films, as well as Pacific Islander films, typically focusing in directors in the Pacific Northwest, but also just across the regions in our communities. So again, what does it mean to you to be a part of the Seattle Asian American Film Festival? And we can go around, maybe starting with Erin.
Yeah, no, it's a great honor. I am coming from a Chinese Hawaiian background. I think especially in these past couple of years, I've more and more become aware of the importance of intersecting our goals and finding uniting fronts and finding ways for our communities to come together towards shared values and dreams, and especially for a lot of us that, Hawaii is a mixing pot, and most of us come from like 7, 11 nationalities, backgrounds, and people. And so as someone who is Chinese and Hawaiian and identify strongly as both, to be able to be in a space that celebrates both of those identity and more is appreciated, but also deeply important to start to think about these shared dreams for ourselves and how we find solidarity with each other, and not just necessarily within our own communities alone, but among each other. And so I'm very, very grateful to be here. And my mom is also from Washington, so I will always have an extra love in my heart for Washington. But that's maybe a little separate from everything else, but I love Washington.
No, that's super important. Then, the world is so much smaller. Like we only have 2 degrees of separation between ourselves and everybody around us. Mahalo for sharing that connection. Jalena, how about you? What does it mean to be in SAAFF for you?
Aloha kako, my name is Jalena Keane-Lee and I'm calling in from Ohlone Land right now in the Bay Area. It's such an honor to be included in the film festival this year. I think obviously it's been a really hard time with COVID and not being able to, travel and get to like really engage with audiences. And sometimes people ask me like, oh, what has the reception been of your film? And it's kind of hard exactly to know when things are all digital. So I think, being able to have this kind of platform and talk with these incredible filmmakers who I'm really lucky to call my friends is such an honor and privilege. And I think, we've seen like such a raise in an increase in hate crimes against Asian American and Pacific Islander people, anyone who's like seen as Asian passing. So I think that's why, it makes it particularly important right now to be sharing these stories and watching these stories and, learning about different things. And, I'm a filmmaker because I believe that films are how we build empathy and that empathy can lead to social change. So I think it's a really great time to be a part of this and to be here with all these lovely people. So thank you.
Mahalo, mahalo. ʻＡina, what does it mean for you?
Yes, aloha. My name is ʻāina Paikai, Director of Hawaiian Soul. I'm very thankful for being a part of the Seattle Asian American Film Festival. This is our first festival outside of Hawaii, and so it's nice to see it spread its wings a little bit in the beginning stages of our festival run, and we're very proud that Seattle Asian American picked us up. We are very honored, I think, through heritage, like the 2 previous directors said, that we have a lot of ties between our ocean, connecting kind of both sides of the Pacific Northwest as well as our Asian heritage. And so we have pretty deep roots here in Hawaii to the Asian American community. Like myself, I'm Asian, Japanese, and Chinese. And so, but I am in kind of my Hawaii bubble and definitely represent my people in that way, but also have a lot to learn about my other cultures. And I feel like this festival will hopefully clue me into a lot more of the filmmakers as well as their perspectives and stories on their lifestyles as Asian Americans. And so thankful and looking forward to learning more about that.
Mahalo for sharing. Also, yes, I am Native Hawaiian, Japanese, Chinese, and Black. So yeah, for Erin, ʻāina, like everybody, I feel you. Ciara, how does it feel, or what does it mean to you to be a part of SAAFF?
Hello, everybody from Honolulu, Hawaii. I feel like being a part of SAAFF means connecting with our people who are not, so many Hawaiians, so many Asians who have ties back to Hawaii aren't in Hawaii. So I think part of my gratitude is being able to reach our community in other spaces and help share stories of, where they or their families might come from and keep them connected to the ʻāina in that way. So my gratitude for the opportunity to connect with our people in different spots. Thank you.
Mahalo nui loa. Thank you so much. And yes, being a part of the lahui that's outside of the ʻāina, right? That really resonates with me, so thank you. This is a great segue into another question I was interested in asking all of you, who so strongly, explicitly, openly, powerfully, proudly identify with your ethnic backgrounds, like with your communities, like who you represent, and how powerful that alone is in your bio, identifying as a direct her, or a woman of color filmmaker, or a Native Hawaiian filmmaker, because especially acknowledging the history of the media industry being so white male centric. And, I grew up reading about and learning about Native Hawaiian creators or Native Hawaiian authors who explicitly chose not to identify as a Native Hawaiian, or to have pen names or pseudonyms to conceal their womanhood or to conceal their ethnic identity for many reasons. One, to find success or to find access, right, in this inequitable field. So back again to each of you identifying so strongly, challenging the status quo of that. What does that mean to you, or was that a journey to come to for yourself, to be able to identify as you do? And how does that, I'm asking too many questions, but how does that work with who you are today?
Can I go? It's Ciara. I have opinions on this. So 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago, I began the journey of sort of switching my work identity into a more creative space and thinking about myself as a director. And that was a very long journey. And I think at the time, the world was very different. And when I told people my first film was going to be about Hawaiians dealing with the prison system, my very first documentary, the very first thing I will have directed, the first response was, if you do this, this sets a tone for what your career will be. Do you want to be pigeonholed? And at the time, that was what people thought. You can do one thing, right? Or you as an artist are in a box. The first thing you put out is going to influence the perspective on what your next things will be. So is that what you want to say you are? And I was like, at that moment, I was like, well, nobody's giving me permission to make this film. So why should I ask for their permission for who I should or want to be? And I have continued to operate with that mindset, right? Nobody says, congratulations, I get to say you're a director. And so like, you kind of have to make that decision for yourself. And when I made that decision, I was like, well, if they're not giving me the opportunity to direct, if I'm making the choice for myself and my community, then I don't have to worry about their opinion about who I'm going to be later. Like, I have to decide my journey. I'm not saying that's true for everyone or if that's the experience for everyone, but it was a disconnect because the people who were giving me the advice at that time, they were coming at it from a sincere place. They truly felt like this was, good advice for me. And I think I'm grateful that sticking to the things that matter to me has continued to has fulfilled me personally and professionally so far. So thanks.
Yeah, yes. Anytime when you're like, ooh, jump at it, please. But yeah, I know, would you be wanting to talk about that?
Sure. Yeah, for myself, I think at the point of introduction to the thought of becoming a filmmaker, I recognized that there wasn't a lot of Native folks in the arena, and not a lot of like Native stories, and so there was this like need that needed to be fulfilled, the supply and demand kind of a thing, where I felt like we have a lot of people come here, tell our stories, and what about our perspectives on how we see this place that we love. And so it's kind of always been embedded in me that was going to be my path. And regardless of if people pigeonholed me or not, I was going to fulfill, I think, the need that my community is searching for, which is more of us on screen, more of our language to be heard through media. And so regardless of what everyone thinks, no matter, so far, everything that my kind of kahua, my foundation was like, I'm gonna do this for home first, and if everyone else likes it outside, or even if they don't, then whatever, but I'm gonna try and please home first. And so that's kind of where I am. And regardless of, I guess, my career path, if I get pigeonholed or not, it's I'm still gonna be servicing my community, I think, no matter what, and so it's okay with me.
It's for the home. Hello, everybody. Jalena, would you want to speak on this too? Also, feel free anytime, pass. That's good too.
Sure. Well, first, Ciara, I love this direct her thing, and we'll definitely be using that. I honestly can't really help saying it and not laughing, and I feel like that's a really great sign. I love the direct her. um, I also think I've been really fortunate to be a beneficiary of a lot of work that people older than me have done to kind of make this space, make it more okay to be really strong about your identity and claim your identity. And for me, especially in documentary, a huge part of that has been being a part of Brown Girls Doc Mafia, which is a collective of women of color in documentary, and ADOC, which is Asian American documentary filmmakers. So having that kind of community has been everything to me. And I think directing, it's sure there's technical elements that you should know, and there's things that always can be improved, but so much of it is emotional and mental. And it's like, do you believe in yourself that this is a story that really does need to be told? Do you believe that you can achieve it, even when there's people that are telling you that maybe you can't in various different ways, or you're not really getting the support that maybe you wish you would, or maybe you see your peers getting? So I think that kind of film community or film family has been everything to me. And that's how I've been able to feel really strong about who I am and my point of view, and then also use that to work with different people.
Mahalo. And Erin?
I'm kind of used to everything I do. It always seems wrong that I've reached a point in my life where the idea of being pigeonholed or making a choice that somehow locks me into a lifelong decision just doesn't affect me quite as much anymore. No matter what, somebody's going to be mad at me, and somebody's going to try to put me in a category. And this industry and pursuing and making films is hard. And I'm just going to, at the end of the day, to do what's true to me and what feels right to my now, and have hope that permeates through the storytelling. And so with that being said, like, being Native Hawaiian and taking like ownership of that in the work hasn't necessarily scared me as far as where my career will go, but has always scared me more in hoping that I honor that kuleana well, and that I do make the right choices and honor our kupuna in the right ways. And especially coming from kind of what Jalena brought up, is I am where I am because other people inspired me in our community. Like, ʻāina has heard me tell this story like 100 times, but I watched him in Taisanga's short films in my high school auditorium, and that set me on my lifelong journey into this world. And it's that continued reminder, especially when I meet other filmmakers of color who have seen people in their industry push these doors open and like really start to show like we can do these things, that have set their paths afire as well. And so it's really taught me of how much representation matters. Seeing people who look like us, who are a part of these ancestries we represent or are tied to, do the work matters, not in just creating it, but in inspiring the folks who come after. And so I think when I embrace being Native Hawaiian, it's with that mindset as well, of like, I'm not going to be able to do every story well. Half my films will probably be like, that's a miss. And I just hope that the people who come after me do it even far more better and can tell the stories I never could, and give us a just more and more of a hui that can tell the full picture of complex, beautiful, difficult stories that make up our community, so that there is this greater representation of all the little tiny pieces that make up who we are. And so I guess that's like the main thing that's on my mind when we talk about why do you embrace it as you move through this world. And it's for that, and for also for me kind of more and more learning what that even means for myself.
Mahalo, that was everyone so beautifully said. Taken from a lot of your how you say bios, like Jalena's like democratizing like this industry, and Ciara is like challenging the creative and political status quo. Like you folks have lift up, well, how so Hawaiian too, to lift up our kupuna and the people who've trailblazed for us to be able to have this opportunity where we're sitting in a space having lifting up Native Hawaiian voices, but that you four and everyone else in these short film series are trailblazers yourselves for doing all of that. So I lift my hands up to you. It's great, inspiring, like empowering work for myself, and I know plenty others as well. So mahalo for sharing that. And actually, to kind of go off of what Erin had just finished with too, talking about the complexity of us as Native Hawaiians and diving into that. You know, this series in SAAFF is titled Looking Past Paradise, which is extremely obvious and evident in the first seconds of everyone's films. And initially, like, yes, looking past tourism, you know, to representing Native Hawaiian people and our struggles and our triumphs and everything in between. What I found really interesting too was in what angle or what part of depth you each wanted to show in your films. And I wanted to ask a little bit more about that. You know, there's definitely the struggle of Native Hawaiian indigeneity and like giant monoliths, right, of development, for example. But each of your films delved deeper than that, and showing, again, like a diversity in the types of conflicts too, that all peoples experience, but that ours, I would find, is less represented or less so. You know, even in ʻāina's film and Hawaiian Soul, where honestly, the strongest part of the conflict I felt was like between intergenerational conflict between the kupuna and George Helms and his peers, and defining what does it mean to be Hawaiian? Does it mean that you speak the language wholly? Does it mean that you fight for aloha ʻāina? Because it seemed like on different pages for a moment there, you know, or like in Erin's film, diving into the socioeconomic strife and a very particular, like very specific consequence of that being at the heart of it, dogfighting, but then also what does that do to the ohana dynamic? So I wanted to ask each of you if you could share a little bit about, yeah, the conflict you chose and why you chose to focus on it in that light for your films. So if anybody wanted to go first. Yeah, ʻāina.
Yeah, mahalo. Yeah, I think in our case with the intergenerational kind of conflict, it was a choice where it's something that's really common, I feel like, within our community, all of our communities, even, you know, in a national sense, right? Like the kind of the millennials versus the boomers as we kind of face it. And the hard part, I feel like, is no two generation really understands the other's experience. And so it's hard for them to like talk to each other. And what I feel like the Hawaiians and George had done so beautifully and continue to do is engage with that generation and ideally learn from one another and listen to each other. I think in our film, it easily could have been the military is the bad guy, but we wanted to speak, deeper to what I feel like is really the issue between Hawaiians, is where everyone wants the same thing, but everyone has a different way in getting there. And so we can never, it seems that we can never agree on what's the best path forward. And so I think, George laid it out beautifully in that it's like reverence for the kupuna. Aloha ʻāina is the foundation for all of us, and that's Mother Earth, right? That's who we're here for. And do as much as we can and use our God-given talents to do something for a community or something bigger than ourselves. And so in that same way, I try to ideally accomplish that in our filmmaking. I think that's what we're all doing, being both representations of our people as well as inserting some sort of resistance, I guess, or a different mindset that hopefully people learn from.
Mahalo, mahalo nui. Jalena, would you like to speak on the kind of conflict that your film was focusing on? And this is the way we rise.
Sure. In Standing Above the Clouds, I would say similar to what Ina was saying about intergenerational, there's that element between mothers and daughters. And then there's also the complexities of being a woman on the front line. And then also, sorry, I'm thinking about this as I'm saying it, but in addition, we wanted to explore what we see as activism, like maybe on social media or in the news, and then all the things that we don't see. So we might see someone giving a big speech in front of a crowd, but we don't see what happens after that when they need to get food, they need to go to sleep, they're brushing their teeth when living in a van, all these kind of things. So that's what we really wanted to explore, to give people a fuller picture of what it means to stand for something, because I think a lot of times, particularly, any woman online can be a target, but particularly when you're in the activism space, because you are representing your community. And a lot of the times the way you became an activist is by, people, you can get them places, but that also means that people can comment to you and there's a lot of feedback that can happen. So I wanted to show a fuller picture of what it means to do that work and to stand for something. And we're expanding our short into a feature-length documentary because we want to explore it further. And we've been continuing to film since the short ended, like mid 2019 stand.
Oh my gosh! Oh my god! Congratulations! Also, Kalei'okalani. Sorry, I said the wrong title, but yes, mahalo for sharing. Erin, yeah, did you want to share a little bit about your choice of conflict?
Yeah. It stems from two places for me. One, I think I've always been a bit attracted to the gray area of morality and what compels us to make some of the choices we have to. But on another level, I really wanted to get into a place where it's difficult to totally understand when you look at statistics or you look at data, especially in terms of the socioeconomic issues going on back home, of like, what does that mean? What does that look like on a micro level? And ultimately how these grand political, choices or these realities and circumstances, how they affect the people we get to become and how our relationships and the ways in which we get to move in the world. And for me, the main conflict is the father and the daughter and how their relationship is just distorted and crumbles because of these realities they have to live in and the things that they feel they have to do, as well as just like their own tunnel vision as well. And so for me, I've always been really amazed by those stories or attracted to those stories of how much the world around us and the external plays into who we get to become in our relationships, whether we are aware of it or not. And it was important to me to try to explore that through our home and our work. And it is inspired to some degree from relationships in my own life and trying to kind of, everything I make is in some level a therapeutic exploration of like, what is this relationship? What was this experience and what it means to me? And so to some degree, every film I make is selfish, and I'm like willing to admit that, but I'm also want to challenge that. In that selfishness, I'm trying to also be very vulnerable and true, and at least from an emotional place, come with a lot of truth too. But that for me is kind of what drove that. And so I hope that all made sense.
I think that resonated with all of us, and deeply so. Ciara?
I think with This Is the Way We Rise, the goal is really to start and focus in a small way on a person and what a person believes in and what's important to that person, and how that begins to help you form you as an audience, help you form and shift the way that you think about something. I think the more I care about someone, the more I care about what they care about. And so I think that was sort of the process with the project, you know, just helping other people to get a foundation to connect with someone and understand why they think the way they do. And I think we don't get a chance to do that enough in life. And I think that's something I'm gonna want to continue to do with all the work I do moving forward. And if it can help people to understand Hawaiians and what is important to Hawaiians and shift perspective for our community, then hopefully that does good for us as well.
Mahalo. That really kind of makes me want to go into this next question too, of all of your very conscious, very purposeful efforts to create with ethically and also equitably. And perhaps this is, you know, a very well-known process in the film industry, or maybe not. But for all of our folks who are attending this, and because I'm very interested, I wanted to ask all of you about that process of consulting with your subject matter, consulting with the ohana, the families that were involved with it. I know, like, for example, for Hawaiian Soul, I know you did a lot of work working with the Helm ohana, with the family of George Helm. And Jalena, that you had worked with Auntie Pualani case. And I want to also dive in because it's purposeful, like great ethics in your creation, but also that many of you are in the Native Hawaiian community or part of the Native Hawaiian community, but that's not always enough, right? Like you want to portray accurately, as Ciara was saying, like, how does this person think, or what was their process for this? So if you could, if you wanted to each speak on that, what was your process of consulting and working closer with these groups? But yeah, Ciara, do you want to go first on that with working with Jamaica?
Sure. First of all, I can't say you always get it right, and it's always a process. And every project and every person or topic you work on, it'd be nice if you could recycle and do things the same way, but I don't think that's realistic. I think you have to interact with people in a way that works for them and find a level of conversation that works for them. I get kind of method where, like, I'll try and get into somebody's head. I'll want to know what kind of music you like, you know, what was your family like, all the things. And I'm pretty slow. So like, it'll take me some time. I like to think I have like one of my skills is I can kind of figure people out really quickly, but again, sometimes they get it wrong. And so I think a lot of it is just asking a lot of questions and trusting your gut. And really trying to think about somebody else's viewpoint. I tend to be on the more makavalu side. So like, you know, sometimes so much so where I'm thinking about other people's perspectives where I'll forget my own. And then I'll be like, oh, what do I even think? I don't know. I'm just thinking what Jamaica thinks. And then I'm like, well, what do you think? Right. And then it's that space in between. You kind of have to remember who you are. And I think sometimes I fall in the other direction too much. But yeah, it's a process, and you're always kind of hoping that you get it right, and that the people that you're the privilege to help share their story, that they'll be happy with it. And I think historically there was this idea of like not sharing, not being inclusive, and holding on to the cut and the content until it's until it's finished, and then you reveal it, right? And I think a lot of that is shifting. I think in terms of process, I think a lot of people on this panel have a very different perspective in terms of how to do that. And I think that's partially a part of decolonizing. I don't know, somebody else say it. I don't know. Decolonizing the process. But maybe, yeah, but I think other people might be able to speak to that better than me.
No, I mean, that was beautifully said. I feel you. Yep. On decolonizing, no, saying that word. Also, yeah, shout out, with Jamaica, I had gone to Kamehameha schools as well. And we were in different classes, but we had times in the drama room together. I'm a drama student. So shout out to her. She's great. Mahalo for sharing. Anybody wanted to go next to speak about your consulting journey for your film?
Yeah, I can real quickly. Yeah, for us, I think as soon as we kind of had some sort of a semblance of a first script, um, we knew kind of we couldn't move forward without talking to the family. If we really did want to pursue this, and it was a long process over like 7 or 8 years of first like conceptualizing it and then having like the courage to talk to them, talk to the family, and if you find out more about George, it's a really sensitive subject for them to talk about, even with their own family, with their own keiki, some of the siblings. And so for someone, a stranger, to come out from a different island and poke around and ask if we can make this movie about their long lost brother, um, I think it was a hard ask, but what we were able to, the approach and the intention was always, we want this to be a legacy piece, something that's educational for the next generation to know who this man is, to hear his message and hopefully get inspired by him, like he did for kind of our generation. So just introducing that to the next Kanaunaho. And then what we decided to focus on and what kind of they wanted, what they had appreciated about our script and approach was that we were going to focus on the music, because I think the music is his music, which he would have been more known for if he hadn't, left the way he did, was so integral to him. I think what Ciara was saying earlier about like what made him tick and what made him fall in love with Hawaii or Aloha ʻāina, or that idea, that concept, was through music. And so the family is very musical and they appreciated that. And so at first it was kind of a typical kind of setting in terms of like what you about, what you like, and where you from, who your mom. And after that, kind of that series of boundaries got passed, and like, oh, okay, this guy's okay. And then continuing to work on the script with them a little bit. We had our executive producer as the helm, George's nephew, and just to try to make sure that we kept them in the loop throughout that process. And then when it got to production, it was we had taken all the steps and hopefully laid all the groundwork, and we had a lot of kupuna influence that kind of helped us get it there. And I think that was all recognized amongst the community of Molokai and Helms. And therefore, at that point, it seemed like they had trusted us to carry out whatever we had intended. And after that, they didn't really have as much as like rough cuts as I gave them. They never really said anything or replied. I don't even know if they watched it, because I think they didn't want to in a way, and then they just wanted for us to handle that our kuleana of being the vehicle to tell his story. And so in that way, I think the process was actually um, the decolonial process of asking and working with them, and was the beauty of the film. It's not necessarily the end product, although we're proud of it, that actually the relationships that were forged amongst the people in the community is what I'm most proud of from the project.
Yes, for sharing. It's about the journey more even than the destination. Jalena or Erin, did you folks wanted to share on this too?
Yeah, I'll share. So as someone who is not Hawaiian, I knew I really needed to come correct when approaching Auntie Pua. And I think if you're gonna make films with or about people that you don't already know, it matters a lot who is the person that connects you to them. So my family lived in Hawaii for a long time, and one of my uncles is in the Royal Order. So he was the initial person to make that connection. And I think that did help a lot. And then I kind of pitched this idea about mother daughters and how I'd seen them in the news and all this stuff. And Auntie Pua was like, I love that idea, but it can't just be about my family. it needs to be about some other families too. So then we started, all these discussions, and I had the idea and like these themes that I wanted to address, but we really worked collaboratively to figure out the rest of the film. And she helped bring in Mehana and Lena Ala, who are the other two families, and she's a producer in the film, which I think is a credit that makes sense because that's the work that she was doing. So we worked really collaboratively. And also, I think when, particularly in the documentary space, when you're making something about activists or anything that involves anything legal, it's super important that you talk with the people that are in the film before anything is released, because we don't want anything in our film to be the reason that someone has charges put against them or to affect their active cases that are happening right now. So that was a really big priority for us. And I think in general, in the documentary field, I feel really lucky to be, part of this wave and following in Ciara's footsteps very much, but of knowing that this idea of something being unbiased, it's not really a thing. I think it's just a white supremacist concept, honestly. And that when things are unbiased, it's always leaning towards the people in power. So in order for us to give the kind of treatment that people in power would normally get to oppressed people, sometimes it's perceived by funders and other people in the documentary space as something that's biased. So I think it's great to be a part of this wave of documentaries that's really pushing back against that and showing that this should be something that enriches and gives back to the community, not something that we just extract and then leave. And we had a lot of conversations about, what should be filmed, what could and couldn't be filmed. And I think the concept of consent is really, really important in filmmaking, and consent being something that is both informed. So, like it's different if you're just like filming something on your phone that might be put on Instagram versus filming something that might be shown at film festivals like this. So knowing the intent and where something, once it might land and what you want to do with it. And then also that it's something that can always change. And so something that was okay to film one day might not be okay to film the next day. So it's about that constant communication. And like Ciara said, also, we can try our best and put our best intentions forward and our best effort forwards, but sometimes, things might not be perfect or communication might be a little bit misunderstood. But I think if you're clear about your intentions and you're consistently showing up and being a presence in the community and with the people that you're filming, then that kind of trust just builds over time. So I really appreciate that question. And I'm glad that it's something we can talk about, because I think that's something that should be asked more frequently when to filmmakers and to filmmakers of color, but also to white filmmakers. Because I think a lot of times we have these discussions amongst each other and we're really excited and doing our own things, but this is something that everyone should be thinking about, of how do people that the story is about or that are in this story feel about it.
Yeah, so I was like, maybe it's a thing among filmmakers, but maybe it's not, and it needs to be more. So yeah, mahalo nui. I appreciate that. Erin, did you want to also share about your processes? Or
I mean, there have been a lot of profound things said here. I don't really know what to follow up with that hasn't already been said. So to add from, I guess, my point of view and my film being in a space where it didn't necessarily have real people or families it was based on, or a doc. I guess for me, my experience, let me reflect. I agree, intention can't be the only thing we're thinking about. We also have to think about impact. And that's something I've reflected on for the last couple of years. I made The Moon in the Night. We finished the film in 2018, and I haven't made another short narrative short since. So I've been grateful to have some time away from scripted to do some reflection on that. But I'll kind of speak to what some of the reactions to The Moon in the Night have been. And I have got some flack for making Native Hawaiians look bad and immoral. And I do stand by my choices. I recognize where there are upset feelings, but I'll take the character like David, the father, for example. I don't think David's a bad person. And a lot of people will not like that I say that. I see a man who's been stripped down, who has been put in a system that has set him up to fail, and that has been looking for something to fill a void and an emptiness, to give him pride, and to also find a sense of survival, whether for his daughter or for himself. And I am just attracted to that to some sense, because to some degree we do have to take personal accountability in the choices we make, but I also think we need to acknowledge in the realities we live. Like, there are a lot of people in my community and in my family that have made choices I don't agree with and that bother me. But at the same time, I'm trying to extend the grace to understand what we are navigating, and a colonized capitalist system that's been built for a lot of us to fail and to have to make choices that maybe in a more privileged, super high level, I don't know, rich world, you get to be more moral and you get to have more judgment of people. But for me, I guess that's the place I'm kind of trying to dive into and explore and understand and talk about. And I know it's going to sometimes rub people the wrong way. And the balance between knowing where my intention is, but always trying to be conscious of the impact it might have, is something that I am always questioning and I'm always walking. And I hope with every film I do get better at, because I'm not going to say The Moon and the Night was perfect in every way. There's a lot of things I do differently about that movie, but I know where I was coming from with it, and I know what I wanted to talk about, and I still stand by that. And as far as like the research and such goes, we did a lot of diving into, it was kind of more like a word of mouth of talking to people who worked in law enforcement, talking to people who worked in lived in certain communities, and some of the things they would hear or witness, and trying to also find some level of trust there, because it was a little bit of a difficult topic to go into. But on another level, because the relationships were based off ones in my life, also trying to actually be very true to that as well. And there used to be a draft of the script where I demonized the father a lot, and actually being called out on that. And I'm grateful to my writing partner for walking that journey with me, of always making sure I maintained humanity and all the characters represented, and remembering that these people do exist in our community, and I need to extend grace to even those characters on the screen. And so my journey with it was a little different because of the medium, but I guess that's kind of where my experience was and what the process looked like.
I think you said you didn't know how to follow up with that, but that was a follow-up. That was amazing. I mean, it goes back to what you said at the beginning of our time together, just like, you will always make people upset with what you do, and that you're going to push forth with it because of that combination, as you've just expanded on, with intention and impact, and recognizing that. But I deeply appreciate how you've allowed our people to be complex. I have family members across the scale. Like, we should be able to be as complex and as diverse as any of our counterparts anywhere in the world, right? And that's often times when you're coming from within the community, I feel like you have that extra challenge of like, well, aren't you using storytelling to uplift your community? But telling that story is a form of uplifting us as deep, real, full humans. So mahalo deeply for that. And we're nearing the end of our time. Like, I could vala out forever. I could talk forever, but I appreciate everything that you've all shared so far. Ciara had to head out onto another Zoom life. Okay, I know many of us watching this know what that's like. But as a final question, I wanted to, again, highlight, this is Seattle Asian American Film Festival. I'm broadcasting out of Seattle, Des Moines, Washington State right now. And actually, Washington State is the third most populous state for Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders after Hawaii and after California. And we have Hawaii, California, and Washington up in here right now. It's incredible to realize that and to find myself a part of this diaspora, a part of this lahui of Native Hawaiians that are here. And talking about how we were earlier in the beginning, all of our identities are also mixed as well. You know, 30% of the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders that are here in Washington State do identify as being mixed. And so there's just so much wealth in that. And I wanted to ask each of you, what message do you have to this lahui, to this diaspora that are now finding ourselves, or maybe we're born out of the lands that we are indigenous to? What is your message to our communities here with us at Seattle Asian American Film Festival? Maybe ʻāina?
Yeah, thanks for letting me go first, because I feel like this is the most profound panel I've ever been on, and aptly so because it was all women. Yeah, thank you for having us. I think that is a good refresher, I think, to think about the diaspora and where we all are. I think I said earlier that sometimes I get lost in like only thinking about local, but some of the messages that I've gotten back because of the time that we live in, the film has been able to travel across seas in other ways. And so those audiences are really thankful that they get a chance to witness some of their heritage on screen. And yeah, I think we're really proud to provide that. And I think what I would like for all of us to think about, I guess, like what I myself have thought about over the process of making it is like, if again, aloha ʻāina is what we're rooted in and what makes us indigenous, that love for our place, then get to know your place and the people around that are helping to protect it in any way. And then also, yeah, how do you contribute? What do you do good? And what do you like to do? Not necessarily always the same thing, but, and then how do you find use for yourself in, if it is aloha ʻāina or community work, then great, but just togetherness as a nation of human beings, how can we all be better? So I guess that's kind of what I hope for people to learn. It's very grand, but small too at the same time. So.
Mahalo piha. Yeah, Erin.
I can go next. So just a message to Hawaiians on the continent and the diaspora. I guess, you know, what's interesting is I've been going through a WCC program in Hawaiian studies that's meant for the diaspora. And the thing that I consistently hear is just everyone feeling so de-rooted and not Hawaiian. And it's funny because I grew up in Hawaii and went to Kamehameha schools and have hardcore aunties and uncles that were on the front lines of movement since the 80s and probably the 70s as well. And I have still felt like the whitest Hawaiian ever. I used to get called that. And now that I moved to LA and eat avocado toast and espressos like it runs in my blood, now it only gets worse that I feel so far away emotionally, spiritually, from that, my roots and my identity. But as I get older and I kind of start to really reflect and dig in this individual journey of what it means to be Kanaka Maoli, how Hawaiian you feel is going to be an individual journey, and nobody can decide that for you. And whether you were born on the continent, you were born at home, everybody is gonna, to some degree, go through that struggle of what does that mean and how do I fit into that space. And that is for you to walk, and that you shouldn't feel that like, even though you are physically removed, that you are not a part of this family. And it may, I think everybody has to find it in their own way. For me, I have actually found the more Olelo Hawai'i I've been learning, the more that has rooted me. And so even though I'm so far from home and I don't know so much, and I still have so much work I need to do in myself, that has been my saving grace of like, this gives me some type of connection and Kalina to our home and who we are. And I just encourage you to walk that journey to find that and to know that you are enough. And you just have to go and find that thing that's waiting for you that will help ground you and help you feel so much closer to whatever that is that helps you know that you are Kanaka Maoli. And so that's for me like the thing that comes to mind when I think of folks here and that I've met through the diaspora.
Woo, that cut deep and straight. Mahalo. Jalena.
Well, it's obviously not my place to speak to the Hawaiian diaspora, but if standing above the clouds could bring you a piece of the Mauna for a few minutes, then we feel like we did our job. And we hope that the takeaway of the film for anyone watching is that all it takes to stand for something is just a small hui of people that really have your back. And we're living in a time where so many things need to be stood for. So we hope that it inspires you to whatever it is in your community, stand for something and stand with the people that you love. And that's what it's always been. And that's the reason that we're able to have everything good right now, is because someone before us stood for it. So we hope that you all feel inspired to do that too. And thank you so much for watching. I know we're on screens a lot, so it means a lot that you wanted to have some extra screen time for these films. And thank you for having us and putting on this film festival. It's so great to be able to have these conversations and to be able to have our films on this platform.
Wow, mahalo pi'au. I'm so full of gratitude for all of you for sharing your time and your ike, your mana, your knowledge, your spiritual power and energies. This experience alone has been a huge pivotal moment in my Native Hawaiian journey closer to myself. So if I'm being selfish, mahalo for that. But thank you to everybody who's joined us today. I'm gonna do a short outro and closing just to close our program. But again, many thanks to Jalena, to Erin, to ʻāina, to Ciara, to everyone at the Seattle Asian American Film Festival, who are all, each individually and collectively in your own rights, trailblazers for our communities and just powerful and empowering. So mahalo again. Thank you so much for joining the 9th annual Seattle Asian American Film Festival. We greatly appreciate your support for the festival and our communities. If you have not done so already, please take a moment to fill out our festival participant survey. There's going to be a link in your confirmation email. Data from these surveys help us get grants and sponsorships that make this festival possible. And it's another way that you can support SAAFF, because SAAFF is also entirely volunteer-led. Also check out our other programs on SeattleAAFF.org. Tickets are still available. On behalf of the Seattle Asian American Film Festival, mahalo nui loa mai ku'uwai mai ku'u na'au, mahalo nui loa e mālama pono. Thank you so much and take care.